Weather, like business, can be unpredictable, so when a natural disaster strikes, it can lead to a perfect storm for many companies. Natural disasters have already made 2011 a costly year. Munich Re reported that disasters caused $265 billion in losses the first half of the year alone. In 2005, previously the costliest year to date, economic losses totaled $220 billion. In the United States, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, and the Insurance Information Institute say that up to 40% of businesses fail following a natural or man-made disaster. A separate survey by FedEx and the American Red Cross found that 94% of small business owners believe a disaster could seriously disrupt their business. Businesses can take steps to ensure they're left standing. Employing disaster recovery and business continuity solutions is one way. Agility Recovery, a Charlotte, North Carolina-based company with offices in Atlanta, Phoenix, and Toronto, has been providing disaster recovery services to North American organizations for more than 20 years. ILStv caught up with its president and CEO, Bob Boyd, while he was in between one disaster, Hurricane Irene, and waiting for the next. We asked Bob how events like Hurricane Irene affect the way a company thinks about their needs during a disaster.
For a long time, the only people that really had large, sophisticated disaster recovery kind of business continuity programs were large enterprise businesses. They were the Fortune 500 type companies. But there are a lot of little businesses that haven't historically had those capabilities. They don't have a plan. They don't know what they're going to do if their building burns down, or if they're, where they would go, or how they redirect their phones, or any of those kinds of things. The vast majority of the businesses out there, and we've done a fairly extensive survey and found that that's true, that the most regular-sized businesses don't have that plan. So, an insurance agency, a bank, a credit union, those kind of groups, they typically don't have really sophisticated plans. The reality of the situation is people begin to think about disaster recovery because of those kind of big mega events, the regional kind of events. The event that actually is going to much more likely to impact them, that they need to be prepared for, is that thing that's isolated to just them, because that's infinitely more likely to happen than being impacted by the Hurricane Irene and whatnot. People buy because they get worried about the big hurricane, but they actually much more often actually have an event because of something that happens to their location. I was on the phone recently with a prospect down in Houston, and Houston is a fairly prime. Those folks they're sensitive to hurricanes because they get hit a lot and they're really worried about it. So I was going through my spiel and talking about how we're going to help them get prepared for that and be ready. And he actually stopped me midway through. He said, "Bob, look, I am worried about the hurricanes because clearly they come ashore, they affect a lot of people. But," he said, "I'm much more worried about that thing that's going to impact just me, because if it impacts just my business and my customers call in here and they get a fast, busy signal, or we're not here, they're going to go someplace else. If they called everybody in Houston and everybody is down, well, then I probably get a couple days latitude. They know it's a hurricane, And so he was much more worried about kind of that. I got to be able to, respond very quickly for if it's just me.
Through its Ready Suite model, Agility guides members through disaster recovery ahead of a serious event and provides power, technology, space, and connectivity solutions when they're most needed, at a moment's notice. However, Bob said it's the testing phase that demands attention.
We talk about core things that people can do, and one of the things that we really recommend people do is whatever they put in place for their plans and processes, and whether they use a service like mine or they're just going to try to do this on their own or whatnot, they should sit down and test that plan. They should kind of come sit down and get all the stakeholders that are involved in that, put them in a room and walk through, because they're going to, if they conduct an exercise, they're going to find out what assumptions they made in their plan that don't hold water. You'll want to find that out when it doesn't matter. Finding that out when the fire hits, it's too late then. We really stress that people go through kind of those exercises. You're much better off finding kind of those, the holes, the gaps in your plan when it's kind of pretend versus when it's the real thing. When the real thing happens, you'll find other things that failed, because you can't conceive of everything that can happen. When Katrina hit New Orleans, back in 2005, nobody knew that FEMA was going to confiscate all the diesel fuel. That had never happened before. So, people had contracts with bulk fuel providers to bring fuel in to their, diesel generators, and all of those shipments stopped. So here's a really good plan. They'd really thought through. They probably tested it and said, hey, it's Tuesday, bring me 600 gallons of diesel, and it worked. Well, Katrina comes through, and all the diesel fuel is going to FEMA now. So you can't, other things will break in the disaster, and that's why you need this plan that kind of, you can be flexible and kind of adapt as the process goes along.
Not all disasters are natural and can be tracked like hurricanes. As we approach the 10th anniversary of the September 11 terror attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, it's important to remember that businesses everywhere could be vulnerable to experiencing an interruption. A 2000 report for Congress said that nearly 18,000 businesses were dislocated, disrupted, or destroyed by 9/11, and more than 146,000 jobs were lost in New York. Bob said the events of that day changed his industry.
There have been a few kind of watershed moments in this industry, and I think September 11th was one of them. We had 17 members we recovered after the terrorist events. And I say it was a watershed. I mean, all of our members we handled very well and got them all the technology they needed and whatnot. I think it was a turning point for the industry because most of the members, people that had purchased disaster recovery programs, whether it was from us or IBM or HP or SunGard or whatnot, most of those were large, very large enterprise type accounts. And in a lot of cases, they were paying a lot of money to have a hot site recovery location. And that meant basically that if something bad happens, they can pick up a phone and, declare a disaster, and they're able to then go into a building that's already manned and has computers, and their data is there, and it's got all the connectivity they need, and that was kind of their recovery strategy. Well, what happened in 9/11 was the first company that called up, a SunGard, and said, hey, I'm declaring my disaster, they said, come on in. The second guy probably was told, well, the facility here is full because there is a fixed number of those seats. And so the facility here is full. You can make a recovery, but you have to go to Maryland, or you have to go to Atlanta, or you have to go to Dallas or Denver. And after 9/11, there were no planes flying. And so if you had been spending literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on a month for this program, and then it didn't work because there were no planes flying, that became something that became a real troublesome thing to those large enterprise clients. So a lot of those companies kind of in the intervening years now have begun, my term is kind of going internal. Instead of sending, the $1 million a year to some third party, they'll simply have their own real estate and make their own internal hot site or a warm site. And they use it for corporate training or whatnot. And so I think that was a big change for the industry, is that a lot of those kind of enterprise people started to try to say, we're just going to have our own resources. Our focus really, in the past 8 years has really been trying to find ways to bring these services to smaller, medium-sized businesses, and they haven't had any ability to have this kind of focus in the past.